Okay, and we are live. I suppose we'll give people a minute or two to join. Just wait before I do a little introduction. Oh man, I've been so excited for this for so long. It's so good to be here. Give people 30 seconds at least.
Yeah. You could look at a convention panel of people like sneaking in the back and slowly shuffling in.
People are probably just getting home from work now, so we'll give them a minute at least, and then people can catch up.
Or what I saw at SuCon was people were just slowly coming in with pints of beer.
Yeah, that sounds about right. It's similar at FantasyCon when I was there. The karaoke there was amazing. Oh, I need to release that video of Zach Argyle. I've got that. I've still got that gem of a footage of Zach doing Barbie Girl and.
Is there a link to that anywhere, Matthew?
Yeah, I'll send the video. It's like, and he did on his own. He did "I Believe in a Thing Called Love," and I did "Baby" by Justin Bieber. So that was fun, and I was very intimidated by Adrian Tchaikovsky, and I immediately regretted not going up and saying hi. But he's a very tall man.
Just clarify, what was Adrian doing karaoke as well?
No, he wasn't. He was sort of pottering around the back and talking with folk. I knew he went up to him, but yeah.
Because that's a mental image that I will cherish for a long time.
No, but Michael R. Miller did I Would Walk 500 miles, Proclaimers. Hi, Jenny. We've got our first viewer. Welcome. Okay, I guess we can probably start now. So I'll do a little introduction. Hi guys, and welcome back to Tales from the Green Dragon. My name is Matt, also known as Miggins on Twitter, and this is a series where I get to interview some of the best authors in fantasy right now. Joining me today is Gareth Hanrahan. Now, Gareth is an author best known for his Black Iron Legacy series, one which welcomes readers to the mysterious and dark city of Guerden. But Guerden is not the only world Gareth spends time in, as he is also a game designer working on such esteemed games as the Dracula Dossier, and even spending some time in Middle-earth. More worlds than his dog can shake a stick at. And the world we should be looking at today is the one of the Swords Defiant. This is Gareth's new epic fantasy series. There we go, there's the cover. And it's called The Lands of the Firstborn, and it's set in a world where the heroes have won, but a new darker threat emerges, and it's got an awesome cover if we can see it with the background. Aelfrich, I think I'm pronouncing that right, keeper of the cursed sword, Spellbreaker, which just sounds awesome. He must seek out the legendary 9 heroes once more, and along the way, Aelfrich will have to slay monsters, even if they are his friends. Now, in the real world, Gareth spends his time in Cork Island with his family, several dogs, and even more fish. And my co-host today is a man whose name is synonymous with kindness and generosity within the fantasy community. With both impeccable taste in books and food, one must be very wary when around this man, for their wallet shall undoubtedly be lighter, their TBR longer, and their stomachs happily fuller. It is, of course, the one and only Mihir Wanchoo, my co-blogger at Fantasy Book Critic. Welcome, gentlemen. How are we?
Not too bad.
Thank you for that introduction, Matthew. Though I should say somebody else.
I had fun writing that. I had a great time when Mihir and I met up in London, and Michael R. Miller took us to a wonderful Indian restaurant, and we had a great time with Sadir Samir, and yeah, it was wonderful. So yeah, great guy. Thank you both for being here. It's been really exciting. I've been really looking forward to this. I must say you're an author that I've admired for a while, especially your covers, Gareth.
I've been blessed with good covers, certainly.
Yeah. Have they been the same cover artists, or is they different ones between your different series?
The first two Black Iron books are, and I'm blanking on names, so 1 second.
No worries.
I should know this.
I feel like that's Richard Anderson.
Richard Anderson, yes, it is
Yes.
indeed.
Oh,
And the third one is Thea Demetriou and Sword Defiant is also Thea, isn't it? I believe it is. I should read this offhand, and I don't. Yes, it is. Thea Demetriou did the Sword Defiant as well. So Richard Anderson, the first two, Thea Demetriou, doing very different styles actually. Given
yeah, but they're both. It's interesting. They both have a similar color palette. Well, especially the first books.
Yeah, but I mean, for the Gutter Pair one, we were like for the Black Iron books, we're changing color with each one, and this happened to be the green one. For the Sword Defiant, there wasn't this. Like, the brief was big, cool, giant sword, which you nailed.
I think it definitely achieved that brief.
Yeah.
I saw it a few months back, and I was just gobsmacked. I instantly put it on my TV. I was like, "Giant sword, yes, please!" And also, it sounds really epic, like epic fantasy.
Yeah, it's a lot more not close to the mainstream, but like traditional medieval fantasy as opposed to the like weird steampunk alchemy stuff of the Black Iron books.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it's interesting because I noticed when I was doing a bit of research before this that on the Amazon descriptions for the Black Iron Legacy for Gutter Prayer, it says, set in a world of dark gods and dangerous magic, the Gutter Prayer is an epic tale of sorcerers and thieves, treachery and revenge from a remarkable new voice in fantasy. And then I looked at the one for the Sword Defiant, and it said, set in a world of dark myth and dangerous prophecy, the Sword Defiant launches an epic tale of daring warriors, living weapons, and bloodthirsty vengeance. And I noticed that both worlds were kind of described as dark gods, dark myth, dangerous prophecy, dangerous magic. Is there some sort of connection there between, I know they're two different worlds, but was there some sort of connection with the dark that you really enjoy writing that darker side of fantasy?
Not consciously. I mean, I think it's more search engine optimization than anything else right there. That to ride the grimdark wave. I mean, I don't know. They're not happy books, any of them certainly, but I was like faintly surprised to be like, said, "Oh, this is grimdark," and I was like, going, "It is? Okay." So I certainly didn't sort of sit out to write like grimdark fantasy, because in my head, grimdark is like 40K, which is like over the top grimdark, as opposed to like somewhat cynical downbeat fantasy, which is what all the books are. Weird, I mean, I've done loads of like comedy games and so forth in the past, so I would always hold myself as a very light writer, but apparently when I'm doing my own stuff, I get dark and depressing. So go me.
Well, it's interesting because the label of grimdark has kind of been like quite a big topic in kind of the fantasy community recently. People have kind of been asking like, what is grimdark? Because originally it was kind of like Joe Abercrombie, and it was just kind of like morally grey characters, and now it's kind of expanded, and there's so many things called grimdark, and you kind of lose that sense of what that grimdarkeriness is.
Yeah, I've never. I mean, I said I was. So grimdark started with 40K because in the grimdark feature there's only war, blah blah blah, and it sort of bled into fantasy stuff. But I mean, you can point to almost anything other than the absolute lightest stuff, and you could make an argument that's grimdark. I mean, the argument I always use is Lord of the Rings. If you look at it, it is set in this post-apocalyptic world where there is no hope of victory whatsoever. The equivalent of angels are leaving. The whole North Kingdom, the hobbits are basically living in the middle of this apocalyptic wasteland because there used to be this whole kingdom around them, and now it's like down to 4 villages and a couple of guys with hoods wandering around. That's far grimmer than anything in the Gutter Prayer series.
Yeah, I suppose when you put it like that. I mean, I guess it kind of lures you. When I think of Lord of the Rings, I guess it's kind of showing my age a bit here. That I just think of the movies and the music and nostalgia. I just think of the jolly little hobbit beat, and that's what I think of.
They're happily jolly past the ruins of cities after city after city, empty wasteland. where 1,000 years ago there were lots of people, but now they are all dead.
Well, I would say this Hobbiton itself is a very jolly, very beautiful place. I'm very lucky to have been there. It is great there. They do these really cool like parties where you can go for like a summer festival or something, and you can have like kind of a recreation of Bilbo's party. And I regretted not going to one. Like it was really far away from where I was on a completely different island. But when I go back next time, I've got to make sure I have my second breakfast at Hobbiton.
Second breakfast.
But yeah, well, I guess kind of in a way connected almost. I was going to ask about, obviously, so you're from Ireland and there's very kind of Celtic roots there, and some of that kind of inspired Lord of the Rings and Hobbiton, that very kind of folkish kind of sense. In your writing, has your background and your upbringing kind of influenced you in that sense with the kind of grand tradition of Celtic mythology in that?
Maybe. Certainly I haven't done anything that's sort of consciously Irish. Like I haven't like really drawn on the Irish bits or anything. That said, certainly chunks of the Black Iron books were sort of inspired by having like this like feeling of a city with a lot of history, with like lots of layers to it, including basically periods where it had been occupied and so forth. I mean, like there are like several locations of, especially the second book, The Shadow Saint, are based around old like British Army installations and so forth in Cork Harbour, which were like from when Ireland was part of the UK.
Yeah.
I know. It was also one of the best reviews I got of the Gutter Prayer as well. Was someone said, "Oh yes, I knew it was Cork. They're always going up hills." It's sort of a hard question to answer because, like, there's definitely sort of conscious, deliberate drawing on that.
Yeah.
But I have no doubt that it sort of feeds into how I think and how I write. So yeah, maybe not so much you could put it on a cover or like use it as a blur, but it's always going to feed in there.
Yeah. I suppose it's always kind of in the subconscious, and it was interesting. I saw this video the other day of someone. There's an interview with Steven Spielberg, and someone had pointed out that one of his movies, there was the dad was kind of did one job and the mother did another job, and that was the jobs that his parents had done. And he kind of goes, "Oh, you know what? I never kind of realized that. So thank you, to the person who asked that question. I guess, yeah, I never thought of it that way, but."
Oh yeah, it's bizarre how much stuff goes into your books that you don't notice at the time. Like in The Gutter Prayer, there's one character, Spar, who's got this disease turned into statue over time. I take the injections every so often to basically slow it down. And I wrote the entire book. I was only in the last stage of editing that I went, hang on. I had a friend who had terminal brain cancer, and he was getting injections every day to blood thinners. And
Wow.
I was thinking, oh, that's where I got that from. That's like what was bubbling in the subconscious. And
Yeah.
and until it was literally like the book was like about to go to press, and that's that I only saw it then, despite having like lived in the text for like a year and a bit.
Yeah. How many times, like when you're editing that, I've always been curious, just how many times do you like read it over and over again? Does it?
Until you're sick of it, and then several times more. But basically, when you're writing a book, when I am writing a book, certainly, I have the whole thing in my head the whole time. Like with the middle of a project, it's all in there. And to get any sort of distance from it, I'm going to put it aside for a few weeks and then come back to it with fresh eyes. So like they're basically like 3 or 4 different periods where the book is like front of my brain and the whole thing there, then put it aside, come back and look again, reload it to memory, go through it again, get sick of it again, cast it away. I just handed in the manuscript for sequel to The Sword Defiant.
Oh, okay.
Okay.
I've now forgotten everything that happens in it. It's great. My brain is empty again.
Yeah, I was going to say, because like you must have so many worlds in your heads, like especially because you're a game designer as well, and you're writing 2 different series. I imagine maybe you have some more in the back of your mind. Like, how do you kind of keep that all together and separate it?
Yeah, but when I'm working on a thing, I know it all. When I'm not working on it, I'll forget it. To sort of load back up on something, I will have a couple of sort of touchstone texts or pieces of text. Like if I'm going when I go back to Black Iron books or a couple of chapters, I will reread to get back in the mood for those. If I'm going to be working on the One Ring stuff, I'll just page through chunks of Lord of the Rings and just like get myself back into that mindset, because it's even when it's not in sort of like the front of your head and sort of conscious memory, it's all back in the back somewhere. And you just need to trigger those memories. The hellish thing is where you try to have to switch between them very rapidly, and you try to hold more than your brain can hold at any one time, which is bad.
Have you ever accidentally called one of your kids one of your characters or anything like that?
I haven't called any kids, but I have occasionally written in the wrong document, or written the wrong thing in the wrong document, maybe don't exist in one world in another world. But what I try to do is never work on 2 things that are very, very close at the same time. Although at the moment I'm working on Maria for the One Ring role game in one thing, and Heart, which is this other dungeon crawling thing in another window. But fortunately, Heart is this bizarre, surreal steampunk horror thing, and Maria is Maria, so they're nicely different. But I try to avoid doing the same. I couldn't work on Maria and Sword Defiant at the same time because they're both Tolkien-ish. I would really risk getting things confused or things bleeding into each other.
Gareth, I have a question though. I know some writers, what they like to do is they'll create these summaries or Bibles for themselves, which for the stuff, because it's like the world building stuff and character summaries, which of course can't go those because they're spoilers. And they sometimes refer to that when they're wanting to get before writing a sequel, or if they wanted to come back to that world. Have you done something like this, or would you consider doing something like this?
I tried doing that for the Gutter Pair when I was writing it, but because I spent so much time, I've been working on licensed books. I'm basically very, very good at basically loading a whole setting into memory and having it there. So I found that the effort of going to create the Bible, well, it probably would be a good thing to do for my own, for other people if I was going to do a game or something based on it. I don't need to do it for myself, or to tell myself that. And that's just faster to basically skim reread things, trigger those memories again, get it back in. Also, I tend to basically write stuff, write names and so forth, and then discover what they are. So doing a Bible in advance just wouldn't work for me. So, and then going back and doing a Bible after the book is done seems like a lot of work that I'm not getting paid for. So.
So you described the Sword Defiant as kind of Tolkien-esque fantasy. So is that kind of where the first idea came from, that you wanted to write something adjacent to that, but kind of twist it a little bit?
Well, the starting point, there's a line in the intro to Lord of the Rings where Tolkien's talking about how Lord of the Rings isn't an allegory for World War II. And he says that if the War of the Ring had followed the course of the current war, then Barad-dûr would not have been destroyed but occupied, like the Allies occupied Berlin. And I went, that's a fantastic idea. You should, someone should do that. And several years later, I did. I've always been fascinated by occupied cities because, Berlin, Istanbul at times, basically because you've got sort of 2 groups in there, which is instant like dramatic tension and potential for conflict. But at the same time, people are trying to live side by side, so your things aren't going to explode right away. So there's plenty of scope for intrigue and so forth. Like the original title for The Sword Defiant was The Green Scar, and I was reading lots of books about the Green Zone in Baghdad when the Americans were occupying it, and how basically you had this little sort of enclave of Americana in the middle of an occupied city. So yeah, it's basically Tolkien as filtered through the American occupation of Iraq.
That is a very interesting mashup.
Well, yeah, I mean, all books that I think have that, like, I'm always very suspicious of people who say, like, oh, here's where the idea for my book came from. Because certainly for me, it's like, either like 4 or 5 different ideas bouncing around my head at one time, and eventually 2 or 3 of them will like collide and coalesce. And then you're sort of sitting there going, oh, that's where that came from. That's a very weird confluence of ideas, but I'm stuck with it now, so I'll keep going.
That's an interesting point you bring up, Gareth, because when I was reading it, the one thing which quickly struck me was that there's the events begin after like a massively epic event. Like you have, and forgive me, I think that this is in a bit of a blurb, as this is part of the blurb, so it's not really spoilers. So for anybody worried about spoilers, it's not spoilers. The story begins after the group of heroes called the Nine have defeated the Dark Lord. Now, characters, I mean, just going off of fantasy, that's not how the story begins. Most of our stories begin with like how the Nine came together and defeated the Dark Lord. That's the story. But you kind of have bypassed this, and then you directly jump afterwards. So that was really, is that what you're going for with this?
Oh yeah. Well, I sort of felt that like the Nine are the most like generic, are presented as the most generic bunch of adventures ever. They're like your classic mismatch heroes, and I felt like that story has definitely already been done. So like while the precise like set of events and so forth that lead up to it, like bits of them are important, but most of the Nine's adventures I sort of throw away references. Oh yes, they fought a Hydra, and remember that time at the bridge, and like you can fill in those from whatever other fantasy series you want. Like they had lots of adventures. They I feel like the classic quest to kill Dark Lord, other people have done that perfectly. It was like it's a solved problem. The one thing that I love Tolkien to bits, beyond all measure, as anyone who's like looked at my career could tell. But I've always thought that the ending is a bit of a cheat, because it is like a super happy ending and everything works out. And then you look at the real world, you're there going, that doesn't happen. So it was like taking the happy ending of a fantasy series and playing it forward 20 years and seeing how things went wrong, how things can be salvaged. I guess it's the whole nation building and so forth. Yeah, basically, winning the war is easy. Winning the peace is a lot harder. I mean, do like dark stuff, don't I?
Well, it's deeply. I think it's deeply fascinating because it's a unique perspective that I haven't often seen. Because you either get, like you say, the standard hero fare, which is great, and I love it. I love epic fantasy, but it has been done to death, and it does take a lot to kind of come at that with a different spin. And then the other thing you see is like the adventurer is retired, which has kind of become more popular in last years. The retired adventurer who comes back for one more adventure, but he's still the good adventurer, and he's still got it, and it's still in that very sort of neat kind of box. But this kind of isn't quite that. It's not, he's just living his happy retirement, and it's 20 years later, and suddenly he's got to get the old gang back together. It's slightly different to that, and that's what I like. Is from the blurb, I think it's the kind of thing that I like, because it plays to those tropes that I really love, but it takes it beyond that to a place that I haven't been before, which is really exciting to think about.
Because Alf, the main character book, would totally agree with you. He starts off thinking that he's going to get the band back together. That yes, we're back. We're those days 20 years ago. Yes, we were fighting evil. Yes, it was all terrifying. But those are the best days of my life. And now they're back again. Now we're my old friends. We're going to go for another adventure. And he gets to them and realizes that things are far, far more tangled and complicated. So yeah, I mean the trope of like the like 20-year-old heroes has been done a lot. I was like there's Kings of the Wild is the classic or like recent classic example there, and I'm pretty sure that there's like Adrian Tchaikovsky did Redemption's Blade, but he's also done like 30 billion books and trying to keep up with him as a full-time job. But yeah, I want something slightly different to the whole like getting the band back together.
And in this regard, while the premise is for those viewers and readers who are interested, like it premise sounds familiar to like Nicholas Eames's The Band books, like that's like the heroes coming back. It's not comedy at all. Like what Gareth has done, just for like reading from the first 30%, it's a lot more complex. It's a lot more complicated. Think more like Joe Abercrombie-esque in the sense that that there's these are characters with personalities, and they're discovering like even though they did these epic things, they have that bond. Things have changed, and of course now there's the real world politics which are kind of affecting and like Gareth, you mentioned, like the city is a character. The city of Necrad is the character in itself, and you kind of get a very wonderful sense of like this city having different levels and different not, I don't want to say ideologies, but different realities, even because there's the people who are living in it, people, I mean human and non-human folk, they all have different needs to be there, if I'm not wrong, right?
Yeah. One thing I wanted to avoid doing is basically having clearly bad guys. Like there are villains in it, but and Aelfric starts off seeing things very black and white. He thinks he's in a much simpler fantasy story than he is actually in. So like you have like the witch elves or the dark elves, and they're like they're spawned battling minions, and they're from their perspective. Their city has been invaded and taken over by outsiders, and they're just trying to like survive in this occupied metropolis. Like one of the rules I made for myself was that all of the 9 heroes still think of themselves as heroes. They're all still trying to do, from their perspective, the right thing. Just that the group is now so splintered that their ideals no longer have that like sort of single goal of kill the Dark Lord. They're all off trying to do their own thing, but all convinced that they're doing the right thing, even though they're all clashing, and it gets even worse in book 2.
So how many books do you like plan it to be? Is it a trilogy or?
This is definitely a trilogy. I originally pitched it as a short standalone, and Orbit went, no, it's going to be twice as long, and it's going to be 3 books. But it's definitely 3 books.
So how is it pitching to a publisher? Do you still like get nervous? I mean, obviously this isn't your first series. What's that kind of...
I'm definitely not at the level of success or confidence or experience where I can put up anything other than sheer terror. No, I mean, unless you have a huge hit in your hands, you're always going to be somewhat apprehensive. And basically, what happened was I finished book 3 of the Black Iron books, and I said here's some of the things I could do. Here's pitch for Black Iron 4. Here's 3 or 4 different ideas, and I picked this one, and I'm so I was very, very happy to get picked up again. But yeah, I mean. My day job, quote unquote, is still writing role-playing games. So the whole novel thing has been this remarkable accident, because I wrote the Gutter Prayer as a sort of to prove I could write a novel myself, and then sort of basically wandered into getting it published because I was going to self-publish it, and happened to get an agent by mistake almost. And
okay, we've got to hear that story.
Basically, I wrote the book. I'd heard that getting an agent was ridiculously hard. A friend of mine, Richard Ford, who used to work with him at Mongoose, said, "Oh, my agent is always open to submission stuff." So I went, "Sure, I'll give it a go."
Yeah.
And John Gerald said, "Yes, I'll take you on." And I was,
you got John. Oh, I love John. Great guy.
John's fantastic, but I had no idea who he was or what the process was. I did it purely just I'm like, yeah, sure, I'll give it a try. I I need to save some money for a cover artist if it goes to publish. So I've got like 3 months to kill. And John then goes like, well, it's John, so he sells it to Orbit, going, "Hello, I've got this book for you. There you go, thank you."
Pretty much.
For those who haven't met him, John is incredibly English.
Yes.
I've never actually met him. We've communicated a lot. I'm aware of him because so many authors I know are agented by him. He seems a wonderful guy. But
yeah. Besides Gareth, I think he's also agented Ben. He's currently an agent to Ben Galley, to Rob J. Hayes, to Matthew Ward, who's also published by Orbit. And then I think I want to say
he's got Ryan Cahill right now.
Yeah.
And Tim
Hardy. Previous SPF.
Tim Hardy, that's what I'm trying to think of. Yeah. It's interesting. He's got this mix of like trad published and self-published authors. It's really interesting. He has that kind of blend. But yeah, great guy.
John is quite literally a legend. As he will tell you once he gets a glass of wine, like I discovered Ian Banks and I discovered Robert Jordan.
He's active from like the 80s, if I'm not wrong. Like, he was, if I'm not wrong, once at a time he was even the agent for David Gemmell, or he was associated with David Gemmell in some form.
He used to run Orbit back in the day. So I think he published David Gemmell. He started out as a bookseller, then became a publisher, then sort of.
Yeah, I remember reading his name in one of the afterwards and that where David Gemmell was thanking him. So I'm like, plus it's very character. His name is very unique. There's nobody else named Gerald in the publishing industry.
Oh yeah, you see his name popping up in afterwards of the classic books you read many years ago.
Mm-hmm.
Wow. So what was that process? How long kind of did that take from getting agented with John to kind of pitching and publishing?
Okay, the agent part just happened in a few weeks. Then we did a not too arduous rewrite, and then it got sent off and it got picked up moderately quickly.
Mm-hmm.
I would need to check, but it was a few months. It wasn't not that long. I remember going to see Thor Ragnarok, a call from John in the middle of the movie going, we have an offer. I ran out to the bathroom and she went, "Yes, we have an offer. I'm going to try to get more." So watched another chunk of the movie and then got another text going, "Yes, we've got it. You should take this."
That's amazing. I love that movie.
I'm very well disposed to it now. But yeah, my point was several minutes ago that the whole publication process for me was very, very painless, which worries me because I'm not used to rejection. But that makes the nervousness of submission even worse because I don't have the sort of the psychic armor built up over years.
Yeah.
When you got the offer, Gareth, was it for the single book, the first, just the gutter prayer, or was it for the 3 books? Because I know with different publishers it can be a different thing. They might sometimes just say, "Oh, we'll just take the first book and then we'll see how it does." They'll sometimes say, "No, we want the whole series," or they'll say 3 books with the potential for the future books if there's more. So
yeah, they went 2 books with the potential for series.
Oh god.
So they did so the first 2, and then the third. And in retrospect, it would have been better if we'd had a plan for how many books were in the series to begin with, because the first 2 books were sort of standalone. The third book, while it works as an ending, if no more happen, it's a very, very downbeat ending. And I've planned at least for another 2, but the fact that Shadow Saint came out right at the start of the pandemic really hurt the sales of that one. So the series as a whole, God of Prayer has done very, very well. Second 2 books, not as well as could be hoped. So renewal is still an open question. I've written large chunks of the 4th book, but what will happen to it, I don't know. So fingers crossed. And
fingers crossed.
Yeah. Well, I better catch up reading it and get the word out. We had a question from the Rebel GM. He was asking you, Gareth, how you became involved with 3 League and the One Ring.
But for context, the One Ring role-playing game is gorgeous. If you like maps.
Oh wow! Yes.
Yeah. No, I was working with another company, Cubicle 7, who had the license for Tolkien and did the first version of the One Ring. And I started off with them when I was doing the Laundry Files based on the Charles Stross novels. The role-playing game for those. And then when they got involved, when they were publishing their version of the One Ring, I did a bunch of supplements for that. I've known Tolkien's stuff for years. Tolkien is how I got into everything pretty much, because Tolkien introduced me to fantasy reading, but also to role-playing games, which became my career. So my whole life has been very much shaped by one afternoon where I discovered role-playing games, which was a demo of the old Middle-earth role-playing game. So I did a bunch of books for Cubicle 7's One Ring Line. I did Tales of Woodland, The Darkening of Mirkwood. I did Bree, which happened on the floor here. And then when the license moved to Free League, or the Free Publishers, I was already working on various things. They didn't get transferred over, but I had established a relationship with Francesco, who's the main writer, and she said, like, come along and do stuff for us. So I'm currently writing Maria for the second time, because the first one belonged to Cubicle 7, and we couldn't transfer the text over, so we start again from scratch, and there were other reasons to start again and again. So I spent many, many years in the bowels of the Misty Mountains working on that, but it is
wow
at this point. Yeah.
So what's it like for you sort of playing around in another author's kind of playground? How different is that to having your own world?
It depends on the author. Like, I've done at this point a bunch of, like, I did like stuff for the Conan game, I did Babylon 5, I did stuff for Michael Moorcock's Hawkmoon, like tons of Lovecraftian stuff. Who am I missing? Oh, I could go on. But like, if you like with Tolkien, because there's such a wealth of scholarship out there, and because the mood is just so distinctive, like adding stuff to Middle-earth, even in a sort of like, semi-official way, has to be done so carefully. It's like being invited into, like, this, like, museum of like beautiful glass sculptures and ancient relics. If you creep around, be very, very careful. Like when I'm writing one of my own novels, I just like throw away a name. Like, he goes to the village of Erstfell with Tolkien. Out come the dictionaries. Out come the Sindarin books. Out come, like, going through Old English place names, trying to find the exact one that would fit.
Oh my goodness.
But yeah, with other authors, you can you're much more freer to make stuff up. Other authors have the advantage of well being alive, which is very handy because you can ask them questions. With Tolkien, it's a bit harder. That said, the best author I ever worked with was Bram Stoker, because we did this thing called the Dracula Dossier, which is basically a rewrite of Dracula as a spy novel. And basically, Bram got his text in 150 years ahead of schedule. So, like,
That sounds awesome. I would love to get in. I never really got into role-playing games because when I was sort of the sort of age where people start, I didn't really have the friends that were into that. And I remember when I was about 18 and I watched the game of with my ex at the time, and she was part of this game and I was watching it. I remember being fascinated by it, but I was like, I feel like I've kind of like missed like my starting off point. Like, I feel like I'm kind of too old to get into this. And then that was before I was in the community. But yeah.
You are never too old.
No, well, I've learned that now, and now I'd love to get into something online. It's just my job doesn't really allow for that, unfortunately. Most of my work is in the evenings, but yeah, and I'd love to get into role playing.
I'm sure we could do a one shot at a con sometime.
Yeah. So, how well do you actually know, like, the world of Tolkien, or do you actually have to use a lot of the kind of dictionaries and things there are of his kind of works when you're writing?
I mean, I would know Tolkien relatively well, but at the same, but when you're writing some publication, you want to get it right. So, like, even if I'm pretty sure of, like, name of a mountain or whatever, I will go and check it just to be doubly sure. And we have, like, other fact checkers working on these things. But what's harder than getting the facts right is getting the tone right. Like, it is really, really hard to add things to Middle Earth that feel right. Which is why basically one of my rules when working on Tolkien stuff is that anything I do, I have to be able to tie it to some piece of the text. Even if it's just like one line from some, like, obscure bit in History of Middle Earth, I lead some hook back to Tolkien's work. Like, for example, in the Maria book, I'm adding a couple of new versions or variants of Mithril. Like, Tolkien has Ithildin, which is the stuff that the doors of Durin are made of, which responds to starlight when touched by one of the notes ancient words. Digging through the History of Middle-earth books, which is basically how Tolkien wrote things, Tolkien gives a couple of other names for they does use for Ithildin, like Ursuleb and Silverin and other things. I will take those names from Tolkien, and they will allow me to add new versions of Mithril, because I have that hooked back into his text. That gives me permission is the wrong word, but sort of like, a feeling that I'm not just creating this stuff out of whole cloth. There is some little tangential bit into the sub-creation. I could babble about Tolkien for years. Sorry.
It's all really interesting. So, what was your perspective on the TV show then, Rings of Power, as coming from someone who's kind of done almost what they're trying to do, where they're trying to play around in areas of Tolkien's world where it didn't quite get explored?
Yeah, I think that they made a huge mistake by squeezing the timeline. Basically, the events in Rings of Power should have happened over like 1600 years of the Second Age, and they could have done it because they have immortal characters. Like, in some world where I'm handed $1 billion and get to do it, the first part of the season is what's going on? Just after so it starts Second Age, and you go through the whole Second Age. You have Galadriel and Elrond, because as immortals, you can keep those actors. You just swap in and out humans. You can even have them you can even have them played by the same people if you had to, just like change hairstyles. Go, oh, this is not Elendil. This is Elendil's great grandfather. Yeah, exactly. Yeah. Parts of it look nice. There are some parts I liked. An example of how hard it is to add things. The whole bit with the we're going to spoil the TV series here. The sword that's the key to making Mordor and so forth. It just felt wrong because in Middle Earth, as Tolkien said, miles are miles, leagues are leagues. You don't have those sort of like massive cataclysmic changes happening without the direct intervention of the Valar. Mordor was corrupted, yes, over many, 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 many centuries. It wasn't like a sort of magic switch that turns place from good to evil. And just like watching that felt wrong. And I felt it needed more in-world time for it to feel right.
For the smaller incremental changes, right, Gareth? Like you're implying, like, it's like over centuries of change, but not because in the show it kind of happened like more of like with a switch of a finger, so as to speak.
Yeah.
I'm curious about, because you seem such a knowledgeable person, especially about the lore, because that's what the thing is about. Like, the Rings of Power were supposedly set in the Second Age, which was where all the lore came from, so as to speak.
Yeah.
Did you have, having watched? My assumption is that you have watched it. Did you find any inconsistencies in, that were shown in the lore, or perhaps they just glossed over it? What were your thoughts about the lore?
Oh yeah, I mean, there's loads of stuff that they see. There's glossing over stuff that isn't necessary for the reader to understand. Like, and you can forgive a lot of that. And there's inventing new stuff. Like they invented an origin for Mithril, which wasn't there in the books at all, and doesn't need to be there. They never really got into why the elves were making the rings. Yeah, I mean, and the whole in the original text, Sauron does come in fair form as Annatar, Lord of Gifts, and does sort of quote, seduce the elves, and they take that and do the whole plot with what's his name, whatever they called him, Smith guy found on a raft. I can't remember what name they gave him.
The not Sauron.
Not Sauron, yeah.
Yeah.
And again, everything they did, you can sort of you can squint and see where that came from, but it was all just so compressed and squeezed and dumbed down is the wrong word, but basically made very visual and very fast, actiony. That it just felt wrong. Honestly, I wouldn't have made that series is the thing, because you're taking backstory that happens over such a length of time and needs that length of time to sort of ferment and feel right.
Is there an area that you kind of think, oh, if I were doing it, this is what story I would have chosen, or to adapt? Or is there an area of Tolkien where you think, actually, they probably could, do this and do this well? If there's a one story you could tell that hasn't been already told, this is what I would do.
Oh, yeah, absolutely. But then you're getting into the whole epic of Tolkien licensing and the rights to the various things, because the stories you really want, if you're going to do a television adaptation of Tolkien that isn't just doing Lord of the Rings again, then what you really want is the first stage material, like the tale of Turin Turambar or Beren Luthien. They are fantastic action stories that happen over a short time. They don't need thousands of years. I mean, Turin Turambar is happens over 5 years. It is high drama. It's got all the Games of Thrones incest you could possibly want. It's got dragons. It's got magic. It's got magic black swords that talk. I may have ripped large chunks of it off. That would make a fantastic, even single movie. Beren and Luthien, has two heroes going off to fight the Dark Lord and steal jewels. It's got werewolves. It's got songs. It's tons of stuff in there.
Yeah. No, the tricky part was, especially you mentioned the rights part, because I think Amazon, what they did was they had the rights to the appendices, but not the actual Silmarillion and the Legends part, which is really
basically. As far as I understand the current licensing, and things are, I believe, changing the backgrounds, especially since Christopher Tolkien's death. The original, the Tolkien sold the rights to Lord of the Rings to this guy called Saul Zaentz, who was a filmmaker.
I read about it.
Yeah, basically everything derives from that one sale, and the sale of the text of the rights to The Hobbit or to The Hobbit and Lord of the Rings. And that's where the Amazon series were able to draw a material from the appendices, because that was included in that. But they can't touch the Silmarillion or the first stage stuff that came out later.
Yep.
But I believe there are rumblings that things are changing, but I won't swear to that.
Well, that would be brilliant, but yeah. So it's interesting talking a lot about Tolkien, and then you're writing, obviously, in the Sword Defiant, as you kind of said, this almost medieval Tolkien-esque fantasy. How interesting is it writing in Tolkien's world, but also then writing your own world that's sort of inspired by that? Is there differences, or?
Yeah, I mean, with with when I'm writing in a Tolkien mode, I try and basically not quite put myself in Tolkien's shoes, but like mimic his style of language, mimic his style of thought. Like, I think it's kind of lucky that I actually, let's get back to your earlier question about like what Irishness informs my work. I think having had a good Catholic upbringing really helps in writing Tolkien, because you can sort of like you can borrow, you can understand the morality and ethics of what's going on there and reflect that in the text. Whereas when I'm doing my own stuff, it's coming from a much more atheistic approach to the world, and like that one switch is enough to separate them in my mind. And then what I keep doing as well in my own stuff is, especially in Sword Defiant, where they're large chunks basically tales of like the good old days, and there I sort of put it into this heightened like mock epic language, like and lo, these many years ago 9 heroes were forth, and then I can undercut that and go, yeah, actually they were covered in mud and like the old dysentery.
I guess in a way, forgive me if I'm kind of reading into things, but I guess there's almost a sense of the Irishness. You're taking joy in taking that traditional and then kind of like ripping it apart, so to speak. And there's a kind of like glee from that. And I get the sense there's a very kind of like cheekiness at play there almost. That like.
Yeah, I don't know if that's uniquely Irish by any means, or even especially Irish. Though you could possibly make an argument that it's the whole sort of inside outside thing where you can sort of like you're very very close to the source but still not part of it, so you can sort of like you can comment on things in a way that we've got an intimate knowledge and understanding of where they come from, but you don't share the same reverence for it. So maybe, I don't know. I'll certainly claim, because it sounds very pretentious, and I like that.
Well, it's interesting because I saw on your website and your about page that you describe writing as the process of transforming tea and guilt into words. What does that actually mean? Can you kind of break that down for us?
Well, the tea part is, I would hope, obvious. I drink a lot of tea. Actually, I recently adopted this method from Charlie Strauss of brewing this like giant flask of tea in the morning and pour it out as the day goes by, just to like reduce number of trips to kettle. The guilt part, again, there's a sort of like level of Catholic guilt, also because I sort of wandered into writing as a career by mistake. I started off as a computer programmer, like just out of college. I did computer science in college, and my thought was I would have a real serious grown-up job which earned money, and I would then do some freelance game writing on the side. And then the real grown-up job went away, and I went, okay, I have a few weeks of paycheck saved up. Let's write until I run out of money and have to do a real job again. And I got enough freelance work to keep me going and going, up until the present day, like 20 plus years later. So I do have this sort of constant niggling feeling that I'm getting away with something. And I so overcompensate with that by being very, very, very good at hitting deadlines and getting books in. And basically riding this sort of like, turbine of guilt to keep me on track and make sure that I hit my contracts. I had an interesting conversation with my editor there in London a few weeks ago, where I said like, oh yes, I'll have like this book in well before the deadline, and she sort of stared at me, going, oh, like most people don't, like most people are close to deadline but not in before. But so it was enlightening.
I bet John and your editor allows you for that, the hitting the deadlines part, because like you mentioned, it's not the norm. It's kind of like,
I don't know. Because certainly when I've been in their position, like when I've been a line developer, you'll give the deadline to someone, and you the deadline you tell someone and the actual deadline, and there's normally at least a month in between those where like yeah, they're going to be late for this. So maybe just creating dead space for them by like having stuff in early.
I mean, when it comes to fantasy, we all have heard of, George R. R. Martin and his love for deadlines and, his habitual habit of missing them for the last 10, 12, God knows how many years. So it's refreshing to hear from, like, I'm pretty sure from a publisher's perspective, Gareth, it's very refreshing for them to be like, oh, this person hits the deadlines we give him or her or them.
Well, I mean, one of the rules I've learned in 20 years of freelancing is that you can either be reliable, brilliant, or easy to work with. And brilliance is out of your control. You cannot like guarantee brilliance, but you can guarantee that you're reliable and easy to work with. And like I feel if I'm hitting 2 of the 3, then that has to be like good for future prospects. But it doesn't help. It doesn't help with the terror. Like,
No, well, I suppose it's only human, isn't it?
Indeed. Like I'm quite sure that no matter how early I get books in and how nice I am, they will still look for like work on their clothes and sales.
A question about something he mentioned earlier.
Yeah, go on.
Gareth, you mentioned something, which is very interesting, because you mentioned that, you wrote about Tolkien's, like you wrote in, you of course wrote in Tolkien's world, but also you kind of derived your writings a lot from, because if you love from Tolkien, but you wrote it from an atheist perspective. Now, it's very well known, like, how Tolkien was a religious person. Nothing against religious people, but he had a deep sense of religiosity, and he derived his sense of morality from that as well. I'm very curious about, how do you approach your writings? I'm not saying that atheism is is unmoralistic or something like that, but no, I'm just very curious. Like, when you mention that you have an atheistic view when you write about, fantasy or something, even in the Black Iron, because Legacy is just really hard to describe it in a specific genre. But can you perhaps maybe dwell a little bit more about that and talk a little bit more about that sort of stuff?
I mean, a lot of the time in my books, either consciously or unconsciously, I'm trying to basically work out how I feel about a particular problem or situation. That I'll often have my main character be undecided about something, and then have 3 or 4 other characters pushing various viewpoints. And it's only in the act of writing that I'll work out either what I think, and also I try as well to basically sort of present not necessarily insolvable dilemmas, but certainly ones that are more complicated, which is why the books are so horribly tangled and so different things. Like, for example, in sort of Defiant, there's this one group called the Batlings, who are basically, they're not quite the orcs of the setting, but basically they're these creatures created by the Dark Lord. They're these spawned monsters. They're as the Danes just, they're grown in vats. They're and everyone else sort of sees them somewhere between constructs and they're not quite treated as fully people. And they have their own sort of take on what's going on. And for a lot of it, even the good guys are sort of dismissive of them because they're almost sort of part of the furniture. And it was interesting, sort of pushing them a bit to the foreground. This is a bit of a spoiler for later on in the book, but basically, because they're grown in vats, they can these vats only exist in Necrad, because that was where the Dark Lord made these vats, and they haven't worked out yet how to replicate them elsewhere. These guys, even though they're quite nice and friendly, have an interest in protecting this city of evil and making sure. And so from their perspective, what they want is stability. They don't want the city to be invaded or destroyed again. They've already had one invasion and they didn't like it. So they're sort of playing all different sides against each other, not out of any sort of malice or attempt to profit, but just for their own self-preservation. And it was so interesting to have a group of characters who were absolutely from their perspective good, they're good, but who could switch on a dime to be supporting the guys who are opposed to the main characters. And it was just you're taking what looks like a simple black and white situation and going, okay, why would someone side with the other side in this situation? Trying to work out what is good and bad, and when you don't have a sort of singular source of moral authority. I'm not sure if that made any sense at all, but
Wow.
yeah.
That's really fascinating. I love that, I love it when a book just isn't that kind of like surface level, when there's actually a lot more kind of thought that goes into it behind that. And because it means you can go back in and you can read it the first time and you get all the exciting unfolding of the story, but then you can go in again and you can see all the little inner workings and all the little things that the authors put in there. And I love kind of doing that and opening up and getting all the little tidbits that are in there.
But you see, what is both a blessing and a curse for me is that I don't intend to do that. I would love to be able to sit down and write a very, very simple heroic fantasy. But I think because of my background in role-playing games, where I'm sort of used to adding complications and so forth, and little sort of moral challenges for the players and little puzzles to be solved, I have a tendency to overcomplicate stuff. With each book, I sort of find myself stripping the plot down more and more and more towards simplicity, to fight against my own Baroque instincts.
That is actually really fascinating, because I think a lot of a story, I guess, when it comes down to it, a story is kind of like character conflict. That's what kind of comes out of it, and so you've got to have some really fascinating conflict going on at that inner level in a story. But then again, like you say, you don't want it to be too complicated and so that the reader's kind of switched off, because I think a lot of us kind of read to kind of have an escapism. We're not there to kind of ponder the moral laws of the universe, so to speak, or anything like that. But I think we also appreciate that depth that's there, and finding that kind of balance is something that's really interesting to see how each author kind of does that. Because some books, they're kind of like really heavy and they're incredible experiences, but you're like, wow, I don't think I could go through that again. I need to read something different. And some books, they're very light and light-hearted, but they're also some of our favorite memories. Yeah.
Well, I mean, in an ideal world, what I think authors strive for is you get both. You can read a book on the surface as a rollicking adventure tale, but there's enough depth in the background and in the conversations you can sort of skim over, that there's sort of a deeper meaning to it. One of my favorite books other than Lord of the Rings is Foucault's Pendulum by Umberto Eco, which I recommend to everyone. And you can read that. I will warn anyone who picks it up that the first couple of chapters are nightmarish. It does hit you right in the face with fairly obscure history. But you get past that, and for chapter 5 on, you can read it as this sort of pulpy tale of conspiracies and the intricacies of the publishing industry, because basically the gimmick is these guys set up a publishing house to publish nonsense cult books and basically prey on crank authors, and then the cranks think that they've got basically the answer to the universe and start pursuing them, and it's this whole conspiracy theory book. And you can just read it as a fairly straight adventure story. And then if you want, you can delve into the morality and the nature of the universe and the complexity of it all. But it works on multiple levels, and you can read it on multiple levels. You can sort of skim it or go deep into it.
So do you I know lots of authors, they don't find time to read books. You as an author, do you find time to read books outside? And when you read books, are you kind of reading them for escapism, or are you kind of I guess almost in a way cursed to see like the inner workings of a novel, especially being like an RPG writer and knowing how these things are constructed. Does that impact your reading?
Oh yeah, I mean, most of my a large chunk of reading will just be sort of technical stuff. Either I'm reading to like if I'm like working on a particular project, then I will like read background books on that, which means like if I'm doing Tolkien stuff, you're reading like there's a book recently called Tolkien's Modern Reading, which is fantastic, where basically this author, Holly Ordway, she goes through all the books that Tolkien is known to have read and sort of goes through them trying to find this like particular chunk of description is very, very similar to the description of the Shire. And we know Tolkien read that particular book in 1936 when he read that chapter, so we're pretty sure that consciously or unconsciously, he copied that bit over. And also would just read an awful lot of general history and so forth. I tend to read other people's fantasy books when I'm not working on something at the moment. So at the moment, I'm between, I've handed in book 2 of this. So I just read Adrian Tchaikovsky's Approach Other Things. I'm in the middle of Anna Smith-Mark's Sword of the Sword. I think 3 or 4 of the books on the go at the same time, and it's in those brief gaps where my brain is relatively empty of my own novels, and I can be sure I can read something without like ideas bleeding in or so forth. Because I find when I read someone else's book, I sort of find the middle. But I don't read it for pure escapism, but I don't sort of deconstruct it either. A lot of the time, I bump into an idea and go, "Oh, that's a really good idea, but I would have done that. I'd have done this." And you sort of file that reaction away. I think I suspect that chunks of the Sword of Defiant come from reading Kings of the Wild and going, "Oh yeah, I love the idea of old heroes getting back together, but I would be a lot more serious about it." And plus, I don't like Nicholas's knowledge of music at all, so you replace that with what politics I know.
And giant swords.
And giant. No, I think giant swords are common to both books.
Yeah. I still need to read that. That was part of the pile that I got the God of Prayer in, and I also got Kings of the Wild, and I still need to find the time to read both of them, as I've heard so many good things.
It is very, very good.
Yeah, it's interesting actually. I heard so much about it. Probably, I suppose about 2 years ago when it was just coming out, and then I sort of heard less and less about it. But I still hear lots of good things. So, yeah.
Well, it had the advantage of sort of saying flavor of the month is the wrong thing, but some books will catch that vibe and be the thing that everyone's talking about, which is a fantastic thing for sales. But
so what do you hope for your books? Like when they come out, is there a different kind of goal for each book, or is it just kind of like get it out there in the world, and is that kind of like the end of it?
I mean, if I were to plug another podcast rudely, have you been listening to Publishing Rodeo?
No, but I've been hearing about it. It's and I can't remember the other one, but
Scott Drakeford. But that's been hugely educational about what goes into making books from the other side. Because I came up through role playing, I thought I understood how publishing works, and I understood how the role playing industry works, which is not the same as novel publishing. I'm rapidly learning in terms of how a book is delivered, because with role playing, the book's something much more functional. Basically, you know how many people have bought your core book. You know what supplements they will want extra material. You know that certain supplements will sell better than others. But it's a bit more, because you're fulfilling a more expressed need, because people will go, "Oh, I need more monsters for this game. Awesome, here's a book of monsters." With novels, it's much more, you don't know what people want, so there's more effort that goes into sort of creating demand, through marketing, and that's the whole question like which book do you put your chips on when you're a publisher? Where do you give the marketing push? So yeah, it's interesting and quite terrifying from a perspective, because a lot of your success is out of your hands, even more so than most other fields.
Well, I guess the good thing is that I've seen it around. It's a beautiful cover, The Sword Defiant. I keep saying it's out on. Is it when is it out? 4th of May, is it?
Yep. It's the 4th of the 2nd. I think it's coming out on the US on the 2nd and
May.
the UK on the 4th.
May 2nd on the US side.
Yeah. Okay. It's May 4th in the UK because I don't know.
Don't they have like literally specific days or something? Is it like Tuesday or something? Is a publishing day for whatever reason in America? I always find that odd.
Yeah. Everything in publishing is odd. It is the most baroque system of traditions and weird habits. So yeah, early May.
I just can't understand that, because it's like, well, if everything's publishing on the same day, then how are people going to buy all the different books? But yeah.
Look, we'll probably find out now that it dates back to the 1840s or something, and the reason they all pushed the same day was because you would go down and get all your books cut to the guillotine at the same time, because it was uncut pages.
That would be incredible if it was. I would fully support that if I found out that was true. I guess I was going to ask, I was going to say, give us almost an elevator pitch. I suppose we kind of talked a little bit about it with The Sword Defiant, but what kind of, I guess, themes would you say that you would pull out of the Sword Defiant that you would like to interest viewers with? That you'll like this if you like this.
Well, basically, it is a not deconstruction per se, but sort of deconstruction of epic fantasy. It's basically what happens after the Dark Lord is defeated. We've touched on a lot of themes already. It is, I would hope, funnier and more action-packed than I've made it sound at times. Like there is, for example, a wisecracking sword, because the hero basically has taken the sword spellbreaker from which was the sword of basically the not quite Witch King of Angmar, but the Dark Lord's main lieutenant had this magic sword spellbreaker. Alphas are taking it because he's and was entrusted with it because he was the solid, reliable one of the party. So he's been carrying on this evil sword the whole time, but it talks. So basically, it has spent the last 20 years, because of the sword, it can't do much other than kill things and talk, making sarcastic comments and gnawing away at his.
How much fun was riding the swords?
The sword is great fun because Alf has to play the straight man, whereas the sword gets all the good lines.
It does.
Go ahead, Mihir.
I was just going to say, the sword just talks about diabolical things at the most inopportune moments, and whether it's action or just whether the character of Alf is just contemplating something or he's talking to his friends, it will pipe up with the most inappropriate things at the worst timings, as always.
The other subplot we haven't talked on is the other character in the book is Alf's sister, who basically she stayed behind. She didn't go off on a quest. She had a relatively normal life, and then as the book starts, she's dragged into adventure and traveling, and is not especially happy about it.
That sounds really fun.
She's a lot more sensible and more grown up than her older brother, because Alf is basically still mentally stuck as 21-year-old wandering hero, and the world has moved on, and he now has bad knees.
So, I was gonna say, when you're writing characters and different characters, do you find it easier to get into one character's head than the other, or is it kind of you just have to kind of feel the vibe when you're writing, or I'm gonna write this character today, or?
normally takes me a chapter or two to get the right tone for a character. Once I have how they feel on the page, then I can flip between them fairly easily, and I'll tend to basically write. I tend to basically write from like chapter 1 to chapter 40 something linearly. I'm amazed by people who can write individual scenes in isolation and then fill in the gaps. I can never do that. And I think it's the darkest sorcery that they can. But like when it comes to switching between characters, obviously as long as I have a couple of key texts to to go back and write. Oh well, okay, this is how Alba sounds. This is how Alba sounds. Yeah, I can now slip into their chapter fairly easily.
So you write like fairly linearly, kind of. Yeah.
Almost entirely. Certain, like all the Black Iron books and Sword of Defiant written linearly. The sequel now, the slow named second book, I didn't do quite linearly because basically I did like the viewpoint instead of having. Sorry, I'm seeing with certainty, but like this may all change in edits. But the draft I submitted basically goes viewpoint character 1 6 chapters. Viewpoint character 2, 6 chapters. Viewpoint character 3, 6 chapters. And for the timing to work out, I had to basically write all of viewpoint 1 and then go back and fit in viewpoint 2 and viewpoint 3 because there's complications with timelines and so forth. And that was the first time I've written anything out of order. But within each of them, I wrote the whole thing in order.
Yeah, that makes sense.
I think fairly linearly, and also I'm very conscious of setups and context and so forth. It's like I've tried writing individual scenes out of context, and I start to go, okay, who's there? I don't know. What are they carrying? What if they're injured? Like it feels like it locks the entirety of what comes before in, and it doesn't work. It doesn't work for me. I've tried it. I recoil in horror. Anyone who does it is a witch.
There you go. That's going to be the new cover line from Gareth.
Yeah, I have a question. I won't reveal how many POV characters are there in this book, but there are a certain number. Now, do you plan to expand the POV list like you did with the Black Iron Legacy books with each sequel, or will it be fixed? Because with epic fantasy, some authors prefer keeping it fixed. Some authors, like to expand.
I'm trying to restrain myself. There's another POV in the second book who's in the first book as well, but gets promoted to basically equal to the other two. But I'm trying to keep a lot less than in the Gunnerpair books, which have just sprawled out with points of view, and even there I'm restraining myself because left to my own devices, I would happily do a new point of view every chapter because I do like actually I try it sometime. I do like sort of slipping into a character and find if I can find their voice, and also part of the reason it takes me so long to find the character's voice is because I know I have to carry that character through like 20, 30 chapters. If you're doing a book as a series of short stories, that means your characters don't need to last as long, so they're much more disposable, and you can do some wacky, crazy, exciting voice that only needs to last a couple of pages. Actually, I was just reading Alan Moore's Jerusalem, which is absolute simultaneous work of genius and nightmare slog. It was a hard book to read. It's like the third time I finally attempted to manage it. But there, every chapter in that is a totally different style, and you start reading one, and you go, "There's no way I can read this for like another 40 pages." And by the end of it, you're going, "Oh, look at that! That does work." But you couldn't do a whole book that way. Like there's one thing which is like this James Joyce parody, where there's no English words whatsoever. It's all like made up nonsense words that sound vaguely like they should be, and it works for that one chapter, but it'll be unreadable as a whole book.
I I wonder what Alan Moore was on when he wrote that book. Just to be honest with you,
A lot of history, to be honest. I think.
the history, you know.
Yeah.
But yeah, no, I haven't read that one. I'll have to add it to the TV. It sounds insane.
Yeah, it's not a book I'd recommend to everyone, and certainly it's not a book to pick up lightly. Mainly because, like, you'd give yourself a hernia because like 1,000 pages long.
So, if you were to write a book and not restrain yourself at all, what do you think it might look like?
Oh, I don't know. There's not restraining myself, and there's like, being able to publish stuff. And I like I can, like, pitch books that I know will get zero sales. My current not obsession, but like, the things currently occupying my brain when I should be thinking about other stuff is the weird confluence around George Boole's kids. George Boole was the professor of mathematics in the local university back in the 1850s. He created Boolean algebra, which is what computers basically run on, like the logic gates, like yes, no. One of his daughters had an affair with Sidney Riley, who was known as the Ace of Spies, who was this British-ish agent running around Russian places. And subsequently went on to marry the guy who bought the Voynich manuscript, which is this famous cult tome.
Oh.
So there's also weirdness there, and I feel a great Tim Powers novel in that. If you know Tim Powers, he basically takes historical facts and weaves magic into them. Like Declare is one of my favorite books. It basically takes all the real things that happened with Kim Philby and British intelligence and spies in the 60s and goes, what's the simple explanation for this? And his answer is genies. and the Tim Powers is you read it and you get he does it so well, you get so into the world. There's a bit where a shell hits Kim Philby in the Spanish Civil War and he survives. And the guy says he was wearing this his like father's foxskin coat, and you're going, yes, that makes perfect sense. That's exactly what would have happened. Oh wait, no, that's like, it's nonsense. But in the world of the book, it makes such sense. You skim past it, go, yes. That's perfectly.
Tim Powers, he's a genius, and he's not read that by that many people, because he takes these real world events with those unexplicable phenomenon, and he fills it with, like, magical or at least improbable clarity, and then you're like, it probably is true. Like, there's no way to dispute it, but there's no way to prove it either. So it's kind of like one of those things.
Oh, he's a genius. Yeah. If by some miracle I'm endowed with supernatural powers of research and prose and time, then Tim Powers asking put George Boole as the current idea.
Hey, maybe you can pitch this as a co-author project with him, because then you can provide him with the idea, and you provide your writing parts, and you both can collaborate. This will be really fantastic.
Oh yeah, because writers love it when you say, "Hey, I've got an idea. We'll share the credit." The idea is the hard part,
But to your benefit, you are a published author. It's not like you're just like anybody off the road, just approaching him, Gareth. You can be like, I'm not just anybody off the road. I have this year.
Oh wow!
From your lips to Tim's ears.
Actually sounds like a lot of fun. Actually, it's amazing just how this like crazy stories out there in the world. Like, one of my favorite podcasts is called The Dollop, and they call it like an American history podcast. It's two comedians, and they tell like these insane stories that you would never believe. And one of my favorite ones, which I won't spoil for anyone who hasn't heard it, is my favorite. Like, it's the funniest thing I've ever heard. Is called The Tank Chase, I think it is. It's episode 6, and the way that it goes from what was a fairly well-known story, but you have no idea how it began and where it came from, and it's just utter insanity. And yeah, I love that there's like all this crazy stuff out there in the world that you just wouldn't believe it. And yeah, I love that there's people out there making it into books because it's fascinating stuff.
Yeah.
Yeah. I guess sometimes like the best kind of stories come with a little bit of reality. But yeah.
Absolutely.
Is that something like you always try to sort of maintain in your books, a sense of reality, so to speak, even within like all the magicalness and that?
Yeah, I mean, at least half the time I write magical stuff because to save research, because I know how complicated the real world is and how the sheer detail of Earth scares me. It's an awful backstory to absorb. So I tend to basically take chunks of history, magify them, and basically fold them in so I can change all the names and don't need to worry about being exactly right. Yeah, I mean, I have done some stuff that is like the Dracula dossier, which is altered history, where basically we researched an immense amount of stuff about different historical periods, because that basically takes place in like the 1890s and 1940s and 60s and close to present day.
Wow. Yeah, no, I love alternate history kind of stuff. It's that blending. I think it's why I kind of love historical fiction as a genre, as well as, you know, kind of historical fantasy. They kind of blur the line between them sometimes. And you said like it's kind of very medieval inspired. So how much kind of like research did you do into that and the history of that?
For sort of Defiant, one of the big influences was the life of William Marshall, who was this relatively like low-born English knight who basically be really good at hitting people, ascends to a level of like political influence and basically being like he was like region in England for a while, and was largely unsuited to it, which is sort of the inspiration for Alf there, where basically you have this character who starts off just being hired or just coming into the story because he's good at hitting things with the sword, and now it's 20 years later and he's still trying to apply those same skills to very, very different problems. So yeah, I mean, I tend to sorry, Mihir is zooming away, so thank you so much. It's been lovely.
Thank you, Matthew. Sorry, I have to jump off.
Yeah, no worries.
No worries.
Bye, everybody.
Bye-bye.
Thanks, Maya.
Yeah, I tend to research the opposite direction, as in I will read history books and find something I like, and then work that into a story, as opposed to sort of sitting and going, right, I'm going to write the story. What do I need to research? In general, there are a few cases, like I got deep into 19th century election mechanics for the Shadow Stage, because there's an election in that, and I wanted to know how elections worked back then.
That is really interesting. I'm not gonna lie, that's not the kind of thing that I would have thought that you'd be researching for a fantasy book. But wow,
like, you know, the fantasy part is like, you know, no one can contradict you on that. Like, you know, if you say that like, magic works this way, as long as you stick to those rules, you're fine. But like, you know, other things have been studied and have been. There are answers and there are ways things happen, and you look to those for inspiration, nothing else. So basically, if you're writing about like, you know, human people in Earth-like place, then like, you know, Earth is your sort of starting point for inspiration.
Yeah, well, I suppose, yeah, right at the basic end. So when you're writing your books, your magic, is it a kind of soft magic or hard magic, or does it kind of differ between your works?
It tends to be it's hard in my head and tends to be soft on the page, you know what I mean? Like, you know, I will generally have an idea of what a spell is capable of, like, you know, what magic is capable of, what the rules are. But in both books or both series so far, with a couple of exceptions, most characters haven't been the spellcaster. Like in Sword of Defiant, Alf he's not that bright. Let's face it. He's a fighter. He hits things. He has a friend who's a wizard. The friend is much smarter than he is. Occasionally, the friend has explained bits of magic to him. Alf really hasn't put it together. While the mechanics of how spells work are key to the plot, Alf doesn't understand them. So occasionally someone will explain, oh, this needs to happen for the spell to work. And while I know why that's true, and the other characters know why that's true, and if the reader's paying attention, they will see why that's true. Alf just sort of goes, okay, that's what I need to do. There you go. And I don't understand why we need this thing, but I'll go and get it. Like,
so do you know, like, are there things about your characters that you know that your audience, your readers don't necessarily know? I mean, I guess you kind of have to know them really well to write them, but do you kind of sit down and write out, well, this is who I imagine this character to be, and this is what their childhood was like? And
no, I know what people do. I tend not to, but I tend to I know that I'm good at sort of reincorporating stuff. So I will basically you start with sort of an archetype or something, develop it a bit, and then I'm good at sort of working in references and making stuff that seem throwaway become major parts of the plot later on. The wizard character, for example, when I come up with him, he is the party wizard. He has gotten a bit weird and mysterious in the last 20 years. And it was just basically, here are some weird, mysterious things he's done. And then when it came back to book 2, and I became a bit more to his backstory, I was able to go, aha, this bit of his backstory explains this bit of random weirdness I threw in book 1. But it wasn't when I was writing I was writing book 1, and I went, aha, I will now put in this bit of weirdness to foreshadow this thing.
Yeah.
And it made, hopefully it would look like foreshadowing to an attentive reader. But in practice, it was just me going, how do I explain that nonsense I wrote earlier?
Best way to do it, right? Pretend like you time.
Exactly. I'm a huge believer in basically retroactive justification and making things up after the fact and then putting them in. And because you can change a book as much as you want while writing it, you can make yourself look a lot cleverer than you are.
Yeah. So do you still have elements in there that you do kind of intentionally foreshadow, or is it really, like you said, just kind of like seat of your pants, kind of see where it goes and retrospectively add it in?
I mean, for like key bits of the plot, I need to know I need to have some idea of where the book is going. I'm not capable of basically completely pantsing it.
Yeah.
What I tend to do is basically have a rough idea of where the book is going to go, have the key moments in place, and then as I'm writing stuff, I develop stuff and I work that in and basically add like filigree and complexity and tend to overcomplicate things. But generally, the book will be roughly what I envision it to be in broad strokes, but I've added lots of extra bits which I need to sort out.
And is it? I get the sense that it's always sort of the story that comes first before the characters. Is that right?
It'll tend to be like in my head. I mean, story and world are very much. I can't really conceive one with the other. Like if I come up with a plot, there will be some bits of world attached to that are like inherently entangled with it. Like for this one, like the story wouldn't work without the city of Necrad. So that sort of came up in broad strokes instantly because the story is about this occupied city. So I just think I can't think of like city on its own. It has to add bits to that. And the characters tend to start off then as basically who are the functional bits I need for the story, and then they'll get more personalities.
It's interesting, yeah, because that's something that I struggle with when I have so many ideas, and some of them are more fleshed out than others for kind of different things that I want to work on. But I've always got the basic kind of plot, and sometimes even the outline, and it's always the characters that I find hardest to kind of come up. or kind of connect with. I know, I want to go in this direction, or I want it to be about this particular theme, and I want to explore that. But I always find myself that it's the characters that are kind of the last thing to come for me, which is very interesting. Kind of people, it's the characters that kind of come first for them. So it's interesting the way it works.
Well, in my case, I believe that a large part is just because of my background in role-playing games, where the players are the ones supposed to create characters. So often we'll find myself playing games myself almost, like, if a GM came to me with this campaign idea, what's our character would I create? Characterization is something I keep working on. At the same time, I'm almost sort of, if I let too much of the real world intrude, I become sort of suspicious of characters, because a lot of real world events are dictated by circumstance more than personality.
Yeah,
and it's rare that someone, when you're dealing with the massive events that like fantasy books tend to incorporate, it's rare that individual personalities will make a huge difference. They make a difference, but it won't be the deciding factor. But that's probably history overwhelm the drama, and people read for the drama.
So you've always kind of written in like speculative fiction. I mean, even with your like role-playing games, really. Yeah. Have you ever kind of considered like writing outside that, or has it always been like your home kind of since, is that just kind of the area that you like to work in, or?
I mean, again, like it's mostly by accident, because I started off doing computers as a day job. So as I studied, so I always sort of feel that I'm sort of interloping when I talk about history and so forth. That I don't have actually when I talk about history or writing or anything, I'm sort of chancing my arm a bit, because I don't have the formal training. I never studied writing, never studied history to any serious degree. So fantasy is a sort of a safe space where I can make things up and be like, I decided to write, because even if I am drawing on historical elements, I can sort of twist them enough in my own little pocket world that I can't get into trouble.
You don't have to worry when you're making something up. Exactly. That didn't happen. Well, it did in my world.
Yeah, and with licensed games, with Tolkien or Tolkien, but the amount of stuff you need to know is so much smaller. If you're writing a book set in 19th century Cork, if I was doing the whole Bull thing, I would need to know so much more. With Lord of the Rings, you can study these 4 or 5 books, and that will give you everything you need to know.
So as being a role-playing game creator, I guess it's similar to the question I asked earlier about being an author and reading, but do you still kind of take part in role-playing games? You GM yourself at all?
Not as much as I used to, not as much as I should. At the moment, kids and family are interrupting things, so I'm still playing, but not as weekly as I would like to be.
Like I said earlier, I need to get into one. I got into Critical Role a while back. I'm also listening to one called Dungeons of Dice and Friends, which is a really nice kind of one that I'm listening to. And so I've been on the periphery of it the last few years, but it's definitely something I want to kind of get more invested in. It's just blowing up. I mean, what's that been like for you, seeing it the last few years just explode?
It's insane. The whole rise of streamed games has completely changed the tenor of role-playing. When I started off, and for years, role-playing was this this thing you did with your friends. No one was going to be interested in your home game. The idea of gaming having an audience and having people who aren't gaming following things was completely unheard of. I remember when it changed. Friends of mine went to PAX Tabletop, the Penny Arcade tabletop convention.
Okay.
And normally at a gaming con, you've got a couple people coming up, buying books, whatever, for your trade stall. And they described the crowds of people following I think it would have been Critical Role stars through the hall. And they were treated like mobbed as celebrities. And the writers just looked at each other going, there's been a paradigm change. This is this is not how things used to be ever. There would never be that level of fandom to a particular person in the hobby before. And there's this huge explosion of interest. It's fantastic. It's great. Because one of the things role playing, it's very hard to explain unless you do it. But now there's another, you can now say, watch these videos of these people playing it. That's what role playing is.
It's interesting because I was going to ask, you sort of hinted at it there. Like, do you think that it's a good thing, or are there kind of drawbacks to it? I guess kind of in a way it may kind of change people's styles a bit to kind of more dramatic and more kind of people are more aware that people are watching, so they may kind of like adjust their style. Do you think that's always a good thing, or do you see that kind of in the way people do things?
I think it can. Okay, on the whole, it's a good thing. Getting more people into gaming, awesome. Gaming is more popular, awesome. As a game writer, more people playing games is good.
More jobs.
The downside is that most of the popular games, like Critical Role, the cast are all voice actors, and they're experienced with improv and so forth.
Yeah,
their games are going to look more professional, more fluid, more practiced than a bunch of friends sitting down at home. And if you come in expecting that level of drama and interaction, you'll be disappointed. But the joy of role-playing games is it's your story. You're the ones creating it. And if you focus on that, if you accept that you're not going to be as polished, but it'll be your story, your decisions, your events, and you'll find the real joy of role-playing in that. So I think there have been people who sort of go, how can I GM like Matt Mercer? And you shouldn't be GM like Matt Mercer. You should learn to GM like yourself, and that will how you get the fun out of it.
Yeah, I think it's definitely, I can see, and I've seen it a lot, like, as you say, a lot of people asking this questions, or how can I do it just like these guys? But as you say, it's kind of, it's about your friends, it's about kind of the different personalities that you bring, and you can't bring a professional kind of studio thing into your own kind of little home. And I think from what I understand of the community, a lot of people wouldn't necessarily want that, because it's about just kind of having fun with their friends and creating their own kind of worlds that they can explore together, and that camaraderie is part of it. Dad, can you not? Okay. Yeah. Okay. Yeah. What was it like seeing the Dungeons and Dragons movie? You saw that, right, in the cinema?
Yeah. Oh no! I mean that was much better than I expected, to be honest.
I loved it. But, yeah.
I really enjoyed it too. We're sort of we all lived through the original D&D movie, which was terrible.
Oh, I've never seen it.
Don't. It's not even so bad. It's good. It's just bad. But it was lovely to sort of see things on the big screen. And I can remember when the Lord of the Rings movies came out as well. And there was I know I'm old, but there was this strange thing where stuff that had hitherto been secret and private, this code word shared between a few nerds suddenly became something that everyone knew. The idea that Gollum would be this character that everyone is vaguely aware of, at least sort of secret pop culture. That was just a bizarre shift.
I can't even imagine. I sometimes think it'd be really interesting, because obviously me growing up with Lord of the Rings being there, I can't imagine a time where I didn't associate Gollum with Andy Serkis and his performance. That's forever going to be imprinted in my mind. And I sometimes think it would be fascinating to kind of go back and experience the books without that perception in my mind, and how that would change my experience of Tolkien and his world, because it's tied to that nostalgia for me. I can't I've really struggled to actually read the books. The way that I found that I can read the books is a guy did an audio drama. It's incredibly impressive. A guy, I can't remember what his name, Phil Dagrash, and he did all 3 Lord of the Rings books, narrated them on his own. He added sound effects and took the music from the movies, and he kind of put on the voices to kind of imitate and do an impression of the actors in the movies. And I found that listening to that, I can do that because it blends Tolkien's language and prose with the nostalgia of the movies. And I do sometimes think, well, what would it be like if we didn't have that? And I can only imagine what it must be like for yourself, having grown up with that.
Yeah, I mean, I will say that that's like I have my criticisms of the movies, and like there are things that I mess up with, but the casting pretty much throughout is spot on. Like when I read the books, I'm very close to envisioning those characters as well, the way the movies portrayed them. But yeah, it was like with a few exceptions aside, the first good fantasy movie we had. Like before that, there was very little worth watching.
It was an amazing experience seeing it for the first time with an audience in the cinema. I saw it at the Prince Charles in, I think it was September or so last year. And it's a shame I didn't get to see all the movies. I fell asleep halfway through Two Towers. I tried to stay awake. I just could, and it was interesting because I was one of the only kind of solo people there, so I was just sat at the back of this tiny little cinema in the Prince Charles. But watching Fellowship was amazing because I hadn't realised how funny a movie it was, because when you're with an audience, suddenly everything's funnier because people are laughing, engaging, and people are stood up at the end and clapping in the credits and this and that, and it was such a different experience watching that in the cinema and sharing those moments with an audience as compared to kind of watching it at home. And it was like seeing it again for the first time, and I wish I could have been there. I was there for The Hobbit on opening night, but I wish I could have been there for Lord of the Rings. But
I mean, I just remember the anticipation of because no one knew if they were going to be any good or not. If you had looked at the history of fantasy cinema, you assumed they were going to be dire. But no, they were. Certainly Fellowship in particular is spot on.
See, my favourite is Return of the King, but I just like that because it's got all the cool kind of action bits. I can definitely understand it from a fan's perspective why people, from what I understand, the Fellowship is kind of like the closest to the book. And then the others kind of take a few more liberties, but I'm honestly kind of a little bit nervous about all these new movies and things coming out. I really want them to be good, but they're just not going to be good, are they?
We don't know. There have been good movies, but the Hobbit movies certainly didn't inspire confidence. But actually, to look back, there's one scene in Fellowship which I love beyond all measure. That's the one scene they added. It's where Boromir is showing the hobbits how to fight. It's like a 10-second bit where we see Boromir showing how to fight, and then the Crebain from Dunland come up and they all hide and so forth, the crows.
Yeah.
And that one scene I love because it shows, and to look back to stuff we were saying earlier, because Boromir is wrong in the movies. He thinks he's in the book that he is. He's seeing everything from a strictly geopolitical sort of point of view. The ring is a weapon. We should use the ring. He's very practical, and there he's showing the hobbits how to fight because he sees this as a war that can be won with strength of arms and so forth. And he, from his perspective, he's doing the right thing by showing them how to fight, even though they will, for the most part, not use those skills in the rest of the movie. And if they were in a real fight, they would likely get stomped. Although Pippin acquits himself moderately well. And Merry kills the Witch King, but that was backstab. So anyway, but I just love that one scene. It shows social Farmer and builds out his character and the world, and was the one time they sort of added something and got it bang on right. I've lost sound, have I? Or have you? I can't hear you. No, you're gone.
Can you hear me now?
Oh, there we go. Yeah, there we go. Sorry.
I think my microphone ran out of charge.
Oh dear, sorry.
Yeah.
I have rambled on a fair bit. Sorry.
Well, I've happened a little bit, but yeah, what I was saying was that it take me back to the movies, and I've actually seen the place I visited where Boromir dies.
Oh yeah.
I got a picture somewhere of me by the tree where they filmed that.
It's just like a random park in Wellington, isn't it?
No. So that is it's about an hour outside of Queenstown.
Okay, so the random park is where they
did
the fellowship sniffing bit, yeah.
Yeah. It's literally 5 minutes from the center, and it's about like 5 minutes drive from where Saruman and Gandalf walk in the Tower of Isengard Garden.
Yeah.
It's about 5 minutes from there. It's literally the central park in Wellington.
Yeah.
It's crazy. And they showed me the quarry where Helm's Deep was. And then in Queenstown was where they had Boromir's death scene. They also had the scene where they see the Oliphants and there's the potatoes. Yeah. And it's amazing because a lot of them, a lot of the tour guides there were either people that worked on the movies or family or friends or people in the movies. So it's not just like some random tour guide. It's, these people were actually part of making the movie.
Well, New Zealand is very, very small, let's face it.
Yeah, have you been there?
Oh yeah, I was there for a few weeks.
Oh, I love it.
I loved it. Yeah, I would happily go back there.
Oh yeah, I'll go back in 2 years. I can't wait. It sounds like a long way off, but I've actually got a lot in between them. But yeah, I can't wait to that magical place.
Yeah.
But yeah, so I guess we better kind of bring things to a close.
Indeed.
But before we go, is there anything kind of else you want to say about the Sword Defiant, or anything that we've talked about or haven't mentioned yet?
No, I feel we've covered my entire life and works, like a Mastermind episode. This is your life. No, it's Sword Defiant. It's out in start of May. People should buy it. It's apparently okay. Also, there's Black Iron books. What else coming out? I've got another book of Adventures of the One Ring coming out towards the end of the year, which is set in Eriador, which is like northern Middle Earth. So basically, you're running around Tarbad and places. And people looking for me, garhanrahan.com, where I occasionally blog, and there's newsletters and Twitter feeds and random internet stuff there.
I'll make sure I put the links below as well so that people can find it afterwards.
Thank you so much.
It's been a wonderful chat. I've had a great time this evening. It's been really interesting, especially talking about the Tolkien stuff and hearing about your new book. And yeah, I'm actually so excited to read it myself. I love that cover since I saw it. So it's definitely been in mind.
So one thing I've learned is like the cover is just people's first interaction with the book, and I've been blessed with my covers for a lot of books where they absolutely nail them.
Yeah, it just absolutely nails the tone. Yeah, it's brilliant. But yeah, as we said, guys, Gareth's book is out on 4th of May, I believe, in the UK, 2nd of May if you're in the US. I'll put all the links down below. Please check it out, and you can find Gareth on Twitter, like we said. And yeah, thank you for watching. I hope you enjoyed this conversation. There's plenty more where this came from. And if you liked it, please like, subscribe, and you can also find me on Twitter, Hobbit Hole Books. I'm normally on there saying a lot of nonsense. So yeah, come join the fun. But Gareth, thank you for taking the time this evening to share with myself and Mihir. Yeah, it's been a really good time.
Oh, absolute pleasure. Thank you so much.